Hello, fellow World of Warship players, and any other random person that might have ended up here. As I'm sure you're all very well aware, very soon we will start getting the Pan-European destroyer line, which is basically a Swedish destroyer line. Seeing as I am a real-life Swede, I figured I would take the opportunity to make a short video mainly about how to pronounce the new Swedish destroyers. I will also say a few things about the history of the ships, but if you're not really interested in that part, I will add some timestamps in the description so you can go directly to the different ships and different guides on how to pronounce it. One thing that I should say before starting is that I am from a part of Sweden that has a very particular dialect, so in some ways pronunciation might be different from other Swedes. And of course, when I explain how to pronounce the names, I will try to use English words or sounds to help guide you, and obviously that might also be affected by how I pronounce English. But with that said, I will get started, and I hope that this will give you an idea of how to pronounce the new Swedish destroyers. So first out we have the Tier 3 Romulus. The Romulus was one of two destroyers in the Swedish Romulus class, with other being Remus. These two ships were commissioned in 1945 as Spica and Astore, respectively, and they were prototypes to the Italian Navy's Spica-class torpedo boat. Both ships were sold to Sweden and the Navy in the spring of 1940 as a way of reinforcing and quickly increasing the number of ships in the Navy. The two ships served until 1958, when they were stricken. Seeing as names of both destroyers came from the Roman mythology, there is no real point in going through how to say them in Swedish specifically. The English way is very close, and I would say that it will more than suffice. So basically Romulus will do just fine. Next we move on to the Tier 4, Klas Horn. Klas Horn was one of two destroyers in the Klas class, with the other being Klas Uggla. They were built in Sweden and were completed in 1932. Both ships were part of the unsolved explosion at the Hårsfjärden naval base in September 1941, during which 3 destroyers sunk, including both the Klas destroyers. Both were salvaged, but only Klas Horn was possible to repair. And after that, it was in service until it was stricken in 1958. Despite being a tier higher in the game, the Klas class destroyer was actually older than the Romulus class. The class part of the ship's name is a Swedish male name, and Horn is Swedish for horn. There are several people in Swedish history named or called Klas Horn, so it's very possible that the name is inspired by one of these people, but I was unable to confirm it. Klas is pronounced with a long A, with the sound similar to the A in the word arm. While Horn means and is spelled the same as horn, the pronunciation is different, as should be evident by how I say it. Whereas O in English is said with a bit of a more open mouth, in Swedish we usually say it with a somewhat more closed mouth and maybe with a small pout. The name should therefore be pronounced Klas Horn in Swedish. Moving on in the tech tree, we get to the Tier 5 Visby. Visby is one of 4 destroyers in the Visby class, with other ships being Sundsvall, Helsingborg and Kalmar. The Visby class is an evolution of the previous Göteborg class destroyers, which are often referred to as stadsjägare or city destroyers in English. They were called this because they were named after Swedish coastal cities, which is also true for the ships in the Visby class. and this is why they are sometimes referred to as modified city destroyers. The construction of all 4 ships was begun in 1942, and they were commissioned in 1943 and 1944. All 4 ships were in service until they were stricken in 1978, after which some were used for target practice until 1982. The name comes from the main city on the island of Gotland, which is the largest island in the Baltic Sea. Visby has the same pronunciation of VIS as in, for example, Isa, but by is not at all like the English by. The closest I could come up with was how you start when saying Byzantine Empire, but with a longer Y. Together, these sounds should make up Visby, or close to it at least. By is Swedish for village, and vis is wise, so directly translated Visby would be wise village. Next in line we get the Tier 6 Västerås, and the history of the destroyer Västerås is, as far as I can tell, that there is no history. The only ship in the Swedish Navy I could find was a missile boat from the 70s, which is most definitely not the ship Wargaming is introduced into the game. Västerås is a Swedish city west of Stockholm, with a coast to a lake called Mälaren. The name has a small connection to Game of Thrones, because at least when English speakers try to pronounce the name, it very often sounds exactly like Westeros. The pronunciation is not that far off, and if you say Westeros with a V instead of a W, you basically have it. The emphasis should also be more towards the end, on the Os part, compared to Westeros, which have it more towards the start, almost on the we. Väster is Swedish for west or western, and Os is ridge, meaning the city or the ship name can be roughly translated to Western Ridge. Reaching the Tier 7 Skåne, we have another ship that suffers the same lack of history as Västerås. So it basically means that it is a ship that Wargaming has completely made up. Although there were 1 man of the war and 1 ship of the line in the 1600s with the name Skåne, but that is hardly the inspiration for this one. Today there's also actually a ferry between Sweden and Germany with the name, and there is an upcoming submarine which will also bear the name Skåne. Skåne is the southernmost province in Sweden, and it has the English name Scania. Scania is, as you might be aware, also the name of an automotive company, which has its origins in Skåne. There is also a connection between the names Scania and Scandinavia, since they are believed to have the same origin. The first part of the name is pronounced as the SCO in score, and the NE part is basically like you would say nepotism. So they should make it fairly easily to get the correct pronunciation of Skåne. With the Tier 8 destroyer Öland, we are back to ships that have actually existed. Öland was one of 2 destroyers in the Öland class, with the other being Uppland. Originally 4 were planned, but in the end only 2 were ever built. They were both commissioned in 1947 and were stricken in 1978 and 79 respectively. The Öland class is the successor to the Visby class, and the ships were larger to be more in line with what other navies had at the time. Öland is a province and an island just outside and along the eastern coast of southeast Sweden. The first part, Ö, is Swedish for island, and land is the same as in English, meaning the direct translation of the name would be island land. For the pronunciation, I had a bit of a hard time coming up with similar sounds in English, So these should be viewed more as a direction, and after that you'll just have to listen to how I say it. Is close to how you start the word early, but of course you only say the EA part. Land does have a different A sound compared to the English land, and the closest I could come up with is how you would say the and in the mountain range Andes. This should be close-ish to how you would then say Öland. When getting to tier 9, we are reaching what is probably, I would imagine, the hardest one to pronounce, at least based on the spelling, which is the Östergötland. Östergötland is one of 4 destroyers in the Östergötland class. The others are Södermanland, Gästrikland and Hälsingland. The Östergötland class was the last class of Swedish destroyers ever built, and this was done in 1958 and 1959, and they were all decommissioned in 1982. Although they were built after the ships of the Halland class, which we'll get to later and are the tier 10 in the game, they are based on Halland's predecessor, the Öland class. This was done due to time and cost restrictions, but because of more and heavier equipment and a superstructure in steel instead of light metals, the Östergötland ships were heavier than the Öland hulls were designed to carry, meaning too much weight above the center of gravity, according to the Öland specification. This made the ships less stable, and some compromises in the design from the Halland class had to be made in order to not make it any worse than the reduced stability already did. Östergötland and other ships in the class are named after Swedish provinces, all of which have daunting spellings, but let's see what we can do about the pronunciation. First of all, Öster is Swedish for east or eastern, and land is the same as in Öland. It means land. Göt comes from the name of the people that lived in the area. In Swedish they are known as Göter or Götar, which is geats in English. So roughly translated, the name means eastern land of the geats. There is also a Västergötland as a province, or western land of the geats. So the name does in fact make sense. The Ö in Öster is pronounced the same as in Öland, so roughly like the EA in early. And stir sounds similar to the word stir, so you basically just combine those. The G in Göt is pronounced like a J or even the Y in U. The Ö is the same once again, and then you basically just add a T to get Göt. Land is also the same as in Öland, so like the English land but with an A sound similar to the A in Andes. Altogether you should get Östergötland. Lastly, we have come to the tier 10s, which we have 2 of, Halland and Småland. Halland is one of 2 destroyers of the Halland class, and obviously the second is the Småland, which is the premium, Halland being the tech tree one. 4 ships in this class was originally planned, but in the end only 2 were built. And this was done in 1955 and 1956 respectively. There were however 2 more ships that were very similar to the Halland class, which were built for and sold to Colombia. These were Siete de Agosto, or in English the 7th of August, and 20 de Julio, in English the 20th of July. These had an extra main gun turret instead of a secondary turret, but they also lacked rocket and missiles in order to make them cheaper. Considering Wargaming's love for using models for new ships as well, it is not impossible that we will get one of these for the Pan-American line in some point in the future. The Swedish ships were decommissioned in 1982 and 1979 respectively, with the Halland being the last Swedish destroyer in service ever. The Halland class was originally meant to be a modified Öland class, but it was soon realized that the new weapon systems which were meant to be used wouldn't actually fit, and the new class had to be redesigned. One of the more standout features for this class compared to the older Swedish destroyers is that the superstructure is done in such a way that you can get access to any part of the ship without having to go outside. And this was mainly done in order to reduce the risk of contact with nuclear fallout in the event of a nuclear war. Starting with the pronunciation of Halland, the name most likely comes from hallar, which is an old Swedish word for a specific rock formation or cliffs, which there is a specific one in the province of Halland. And this rock formation is called Hofs Hallar. In English, the name would therefore be something like the land of Hofs cliffs. The land part is the same as for Öland and Östergötland, so let's instead focus on the Hall part. In English-speaking countries, you can name a girl Hallie, and without the IE in the end, it is pretty close to how you should pronounce Hall. You should say the A the same way as in land though, but Hallie will get you very close. The two parts should not sound separated like Halland, but rather be said as one would say Holland. So you would say then Halland, basically very close. Lastly, we have the other ship of the Halland class, which is Småland. Småland is yet another province in Sweden, and it is located just east of Halland. So the two provinces which ships are named after are actually neighbors. Små is Swedish for small, which is a bit ironic seeing as Småland is the third largest province out of the 25 Sweden has. Directly translated, the name would be small land. The first part of the name, små, has the same O sound as when you say the letter O, though without the almost W-ish sound which normally one uses when finishes off the letter. If you exaggerate this a bit, it would sound something like O, and if you then remove the W sound from that, you get the correct pronunciation of O for small. After that, you just add land again, as with several of the other earlier ships, and you should get Småland. And with that, I conclude my short history lesson and pronunciation guide of the Swedish, or according to Wargaming, Pan-European destroyer line. I will just briefly say them all again as a small repeat. So we have the Tier 3, Romulus, Tier 4, Klas Horn, 5, Visby, 6, Västerås, 7, Skåne, 8, Öland, 9, Östergötland, 10, Halland, and 10 Premium Småland. So hopefully this will help you at least a bit when trying to say the ships. And I hope you have learned something from this, and I definitely hope that we will all enjoy the new line. Until next time, take care.